dear learners. Myself, Bhavani Pintela, working as an assistant professor in Noida Institute of Engineering and Technology, Pharmacy Institute. In this lecture 21, we are going to discuss about micturition, reflex and role of kidney in acid base balance. So, without any further delay, let me dive into the session. Okay, so what is any micturition? So, before going to the micturition, let me see what is any reflex and what is any micturition. So, if I am talking about any micturition, it is any process by where you can send, where you can expel, where you can excrete the urine from the bladder. So, it is a process, it means in shortly you can say the micturition is nothing but urination. What is any micturition? It is nothing but urination. It is a process by where the urine will flow from the urethra. So, this is the process by where the expelling of urine into the bladder expelling the urine from the bladder. So, bladder से आपका urethra तक जाएगा and finally it will be passing away from the body. And what is a reflex? So, it is the urination is a spinal reflex and it is facilitated or inhibited by the higher centers, and when it has been facilitated or inhibited by the higher centers, when there is a maximum intravenous response to the stimuli, then it can causes the inhibition or stimuli of any reflex. So, what is an micturition? Micturition is an urination, it is a process by where you can expel the urine from the bladder. Okay. And now we will discuss about in detail what the process is happening in the micturition. Okay. So, if I am talking about this micturition, it is also called as an urination. So, what it is? It is called as an urination and it is a process. The previous slide, in the previous slide which I had explained you that it is a process by where you can expel the urine from the bladder. So, if I am talking about this micturition, it occurs involuntary, maximum it occurs involuntary mostly in infants. Later on it will be get developed by the voluntary control. Okay. So, if I am talking about the infants and especially elders, in such a condition the micturition happens involuntary, and later on the stage of when the infants is crossing to the children age or in adult age, then it will be in a voluntary control. Okay. So, what is any capacity, how much urine the urine bladder can hold? If I am talking about the capacity of an urine bladder, so it can hold maximum 200 to 400 ml and maximum it can carry 600 ml of urine in the bladder. So, the amount of urine in the bladder was 200 ml to 400 ml and the maximum amount was 600 ml. Okay. So, let me see about the micturition reflex. So, just I had said you that it is a spinal reflex where it has been facilitated or it has been inhibited, it means it has been blocked by a higher centers. Okay. So, what is a cystometrogram? So, this is a new terminology you are hearing here, cystometrogram. What it is nothing but it is a graph by where you can visualize or you can identify the fluctuation of urinary bladder. So, what it means? So, you can see here the pressure or the pressure fluctuation inside the bladder, how much the bladder can carry the urine. So, by the graph, so it is nothing but it is a graph. By plotting any graph, you can understand or you can visualize the how much amount of urine the bladder can hold or the carry. So, you can visualize the pressure inside the bladder. In simply you can say that how much of urine the bladder can hold, it you can determine by the cystometrogram. It is nothing but any graph. Okay. And next we will go with the splinters. So, you have seen about, so in my previous lecture, if you are having any doubts or you can go with my previous lecture, in that you can see about, I had discussed already, these are we having the 2 kidneys, 2 ureter, 1 bladder and 1 urethra. Okay. So, when the urine passes from the kidney, it will enter into the ureter. Okay, and after ureter it will send the urine to the urinary bladder, and this urinary bladder is a temporary storage of urine where the urine will be temporarily stored. Okay, we having the one urinary bladder where the urine will be temporarily stored here, right, and after of that it will be finally passed to the urethra where you can micturate. Okay. So, if I am talking about here we having the 2 splinters, one is internal splinter and second one is an external splinter. So, look at here. So, this is an internal splinter, okay, this is an external splinter. So, if I am talking about this, the splinter, it is a muscular structure. So, what it is a smooth muscular structure, and what it will do here, what the internal splinter or external splinter will do here, it will regulate the expelling or sending urine from the bladder. into the urethra. So from bladder से urethra तक जाने के लिए the splinter will be get help. Okay, what the splinters will do here? The splinters will help, so it will regulate to send or to expel the urine from the bladder to urethra. Okay, so if I am talking about these splinters, we are having the two most important splinters. One is internal and second one was external splinter. Okay, when these muscles has been contracted, just imagine when this muscle has been contracted, the urethra will become narrow and where the urine will be get stopped. And when these muscles has been relaxed, urethra will be get widened and where the urine will be pass out. Okay, and next, you know, in my previous slides or in my previous PPTs, I have already explained you about the internal splinter and external splinter. You having any doubts, you can go with the previous lectures of urinary bladder. We had discussed an entirely anatomy of urinary bladder, urethra, whatever you having a doubts, you can go with that slides. Okay, so we will see in detail here what is any splinters and what is the role here and how it helps in the maturation process. So if I am talking about this internal splinter, as you know that internal splinter is an involuntary control. So students, how you can remember whether internal splinter is an involuntary or external splinter is an involuntary? How you can remember? So you can remember in a shortcut. So internal, which having in, okay, and involuntary, it is an involuntary. So you can remember in a such a way, internal splinter is an involuntary control. Okay. And if I am talking about, so if you remember one of the thing and you can easily remember the next part. So you having the two splinters, one is internal splinter and second one is the external splinter. One splinter is an involuntary control and the second splinter was an voluntary control. So which you have to here, you will get the doubt here which splinter, how we can remember which splinter is an voluntary and which splinter is an involuntary. So to remember here I had given you a clue and internal which it represents in. So involuntary. So internal splinter is an involuntary control, it is an autonomic control, okay, and external splinter is an voluntary control. So internal uterine splinter is supplied by the parasympathetic and sympathetic nerves. So if I am talking about these internal splinters or internal uterine splinter, so just I had said you internal splinter is an involuntary control. Involuntary, it means it is an autonomic control. So what the things will comes under the autonomic system? There are the two most parts, one is the parasympathetic and second one is the sympathetic. So these are the two nerves which are going to supply the nerves. The nerve supply is going to this splinter was parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system. So because it is an involuntary control. So students, I think it is clear about this internal splinter. Okay, we having the two splinters, one is named as internal and second one is the external splinters. When these splinters has been contracted, the urethra will get narrow and the urine will be get stopped. When these splinters has been relaxed, the urethra will get widened and the urine will be flow from the body. Okay, and this is an involuntary control. So which nerve will supply to the internal splinter? Parasympathetic and sympathetic. And which nerve supply to the external splinter? It is an somatic nerve. Okay. So next we will discuss here very important and the most part in the micturition reflex or micturition process. So here you have to remember only a simple thing in the micturition. One is the filling of a bladder and second one is the emptying of a bladder. So if you remember among these two, one you can remember automatically the second one. So which nerves helps to filling the bladder and which nerves helps to empty the bladder. So just now I had said you internal splinter is an involuntary control. Whenever you had listened about the involuntary, it is an autonomic control, right? Autonomic system is an involuntary, right? So these the involuntary splinters, so if I am talking about the internal splinter, the nerve supplied to the internal splinter was parasympathetic and sympathetic. So here we will discuss which nerve is going to fill the bladder and which nerve helps to empty the bladder. Okay, so first we will see which nerve is helping to fill the bladder. Okay, so filling the bladder, the sympathetic nerve will be help, and to empty the bladder, parasympathetic nervous system will be help. So parasympathetic nerve will get help. Okay, so first we will discuss about to fill the bladder. So how the bladder will get filled? So just I had said you to filling the bladder, sympathetic system will place a very important role. It means sympathetic nerves will place a very important role to filling the bladder by contracting the detritus muscle. Okay, so what it is? Detritus muscle, it is a smooth muscle. It is nothing but it is a smooth muscle, and the both internal splinter and the detritus muscle both are involuntary control. Both are the autonomic autonomic control. Okay. So, when we have to fill the bladder, what is going to happen here? The sympathetic nerve. Which sympathetic nerve? Hypogastric sympathetic nerve. So, look at here. So, this is a sympathetic nerve which is named as hypogastric. So, hypogastric sympathetic nerve will stimulate when this nerve has been stimulated. Normally, the nerve will not be stimulated to fill the bladder. If the bladder have to fill, then just in my first slide I have said you, for micturition, the facilitating or inhibiting which has been demonstrated, which has been plays an important role by the higher centers, right. So, to fill the bladder, the parasympathetic system will not place any role here. The only system will place an important role was sympathetic nervous system. So, to fill the bladder, the hypogastric nerve will get stimulated, and when this nerve has been stimulated, what is going to happen? Here the detorus muscle will be get relaxed. The detorus muscle will be get relaxed and internal sphincter will be get contracted. So, the simple students you can remember here, when the sympathetic nerve is get stimulated, activated, the detorus muscle will be get relaxed. The muscle when it has been relaxed, so the urine can be filled into the bladder, okay, and vice versa. So, to empty the bladder, what is going to happen? To empty the bladder, the parasympathetic nerve will be get stimulated. Which parasympathetic nerve is going to stimulate here? Pelvic parasympathetic nerve. Okay, this is pelvic. Pelvic is a parasympathetic nerve. Okay, and this pelvic nerve will plays an important role to empty the bladder. So, जो जितना amount है urine already आपका bladder में fill हो चुका है. Now, what is the next step? You have to empty the bladder. And how we will empty the bladder? The emptying of the bladder, the pelvic parasympathetic nerve will be get stimulated. When this nerve gets stimulated, here the detorus muscle will be get contracted. When the detorus muscle will be get contracted, the urine will be emptied. Okay, the urine, the bladder, so bladder will be get emptied and urine will be passed. Finally, you can see the micturition. Okay, so this is the points you have to remember here. I had discussed about the two nerves. One is parasympathetic nerve and second one is the sympathetic nerve. So, what is the major role here of about these nerves? So, to filling the bladder, one nerve is going to help, and to empty the bladder, another nerve is going to help. So, to fill the bladder, sympathetic, hypogastric, sympathetic nerve will help, and what is going to happen here? Here the detorus muscle, will be get relaxed, okay. And what is the next? To empty the bladder, here the pelvic parasympathetic nerve will get activated, will get stimulated. By getting the stimulation, what is going to happen here? The contraction of an detorus muscle, vice versa. So, here you can see the relaxation of the detorus muscle, and to empty the bladder you will see the contraction of an detorus muscle. And if you see here, in filling the bladder, the contraction of internal sphincter, and here you will see the relaxation of internal sphincter. So, this is the difference you have to remember to filling the bladder and to emptying the bladder. Okay, so this is in a pathway, students, how the micturition exactly will be going to happen. Okay, first the afferent arterioles, and then it will enters to the glomerulus, and glomerulus say Bowman's capsule. From Bowman's capsule it will enter into the PCT. What is mean by PCT? Proximal converted tubule. Okay, proximal converted tubule, and next it will enter into the loop of Henle. So, loop of Henle is nothing but the first proximal converted tubule, descending limb of Henle, and after that ascending limb of Henle. So, this is you can call as any loop of Henle, right. So, from proximal converted tubule to loop of Henle, from loop of Henle to the distal converted tubule, which you can shortly named as DCT, distal converted tubule, and from it is going to the collecting duct, and finally renal calyx, and renal calyx say renal pelvis, and finally it will enter into the uterus, urinary bladder, and finally urethra. Okay, urethra, and finally it will enter into the urethra. From urinary bladder, say the urine will be entered into the urethra. So, this is a pathway how the micturition will be going to happen. Okay, and this is very simplified pathway. You can understand in a better way how the exactly micturition is going to happen in the body. Okay, so when the urine volume has been increased, just imagine when the volume of urine has been increased, it means the bladder has been filled. here the bladder, inside the bladder the pressure has been increased. Why the pressure has been increased? तो जितना amount है तो सारे यूरिन आपका fill हो चुका है bladder के अंदर. So how much of urine has been filled inside the bladder, the pressure inside the bladder will be get raised, right? So inside the pressure of a bladder will be get increased due to because of more filling of urine in the bladder. So when the volume of urine has been increased, then what is going to happen? There is a stretch receptors which is present on the bladder wall. Okay, what receptor it is? Stretch receptors. Where the stretch receptors are been presented? It is present on the wall. It is present on the bladder wall. So when the volume of urine has been increased in the urinary bladder, then the stretch receptor will be get activated. Okay, and where the stretch receptors is present? It is present on the bladder. Okay, it is present on the bladder wall. Okay, so when this receptor has been activated, then what is going to happen? The pelvic nerve. So what is the pelvic nerve? Pelvic nerve is a parasympathetic nerve. So here the parasympathetic nerve will give the signal to the urinary bladder. So which nerve is going to give the signal to the urinary bladder? Parasympathetic nerve. Which parasympathetic nerve it is? It is pelvic parasympathetic nerve is going to give the signal to the urinary bladder. When it receives the signal from the parasympathetic nerve, then what is going to happen? Contraction of detrus muscle, right? So whenever you hear the parasympathetic nerve, you have to remember the bladder is going to empty. And whenever you had hear the sympathetic nerve, hypogastric nerve, it means the bladder is going to fill the urine. Okay, so here which nerve has been get activated? The pelvic nerve. So pelvic nerve is a parasympathetic nerve. When this nerve receives, when this nerve gives the signal to the urinary bladder, what is going to happen? Contraction of an uterus muscle, and when this seen the contraction of an uterus muscle, so you can say here the contraction of uterus muscle and relaxation of any internal sphincter, and the urine will be passed into the urethra, and again it will wait for the further signal from the higher center, and if the signal is to micturate. Okay, so now what is going to happen? The micturition have to be done. The micturition process have to be done. So when the parasympathetic nerve has received the signal and which sends to the bladder, so the bladder can so that it can eliminate or it can expel the urine from the body, right? So when the urine passes into the urethra and again signal reaches to the higher center into the brain. So if the signal is to micturate, then the sympathetic nerves will be get inhibited. So why the sympathetic nerves will be get inhibited? Because this is an involuntary control which is not in our hands, right? When the parasympathetic nervous system has been stimulated, so parasympathetic nervous system, what is the role of parasympathetic nervous system? To send the urine from the bladder, right? So when the parasympathetic system has been activated or stimulated, and if there is signal to micturate, then the sympathetic nervous system will be get inhibited. Why these nerves will be get inhibited? If the sympathetic nervous system is activated, so sympathetic system का role क्या है? Sympathetic nerves का, not system, sympathetic nerve. Here I am talking about the hypogastric nerve. What is the role of hypogastric nerve? To fill the urine. So here already we had received the signal to micturate. So to micturation process, here the sympathetic nerves will be get inhibited. Okay. So if the signal is not to micturate, so if I am talking in the previous point I had said you, if the signal was to micturate, then the sympathetic system will be get inhibited, and if the signal is not to micturate, then the sympathetic system is not will be get inhibited and the urine will be filled into the bladder. But at a certain point of time tak the urine bladder can hold the urine, but at a certain time you have to micturate from the body. Okay, and next we will discuss about the role of kidney in acid-base balance. So you know that the kidney is a very important organ which plays an important role in maintaining the acid-base balance. If there is any disturbances, if there is any imbalance between the acid-base balance, definitely you are going to see some disorders like acid-base disorders, right? So what is going to happen here? So here the kidney helps to reabsorb the carbonates and to secrete the proton ions. So what is the major function of any kidney? It have to maintain the acid-base balance. How it is going to maintain the acid balance? It is going to maintain the acid-base balance by inhibiting or by reabsorbing the bicarbonates into the blood and sending the proton ions into the urine. Okay. So the first one is reabsorption of bicarbonates. The bicarbonates is which acts as a buffer, it is a base. So it will see the reabsorption, okay, reabsorption into the blood, and second one was hydrogen ion. Okay, it is an acid, H plus proton, it is an acid, right. So, if you see here, to secrete the hydrogen ions into the urine. So, what is the role of kidney here? To reabsorb the bicarbonates into the blood and to send the proton ions into the urine, and in such a way the kidney will maintain the acid base balance. So, if imagine, just you imagine, if the bicarbonates has been eliminated more, actually what is going to, what have to happen? Bicarbonates have to reabsorb into the blood. So, it is not happening. For example, the bicarbonates was not reabsorbing. So, why it is not reabsorbing? If you say the kidneys was not properly functioning in a particular person, it is not able to reabsorb the bicarbonates into the blood. So, what is going to happen? If the bicarbonates has been not reabsorbed into the blood, definitely it is going to eliminate from the body. And when this bicarbonates is going from the body, when it is eliminating from the body, it means it acts as a buffer. So, the base is some part of the buffering, essential buffer is losing from a body, and it is going into the urine, right. So, the loss of an essential buffer into the urine resulting the acidification. So, what is going to be, what is the necessity here? The kidney, why have to maintain the acid base balance? If it is not able to maintain the acid balance, then what is going to happen? Acidosis or alkalosis. These are the two things you will see in the body system, right. So, if the bicarbonates was not properly reabsorbed into the body, what is going to happen? Here you can see the acidosis, okay, and vice versa. If the more amount of bicarbonates has been absorbed into the body, and which is more amount of bicarbonates are present inside the blood, which can cause us alkalosis, okay, acidosis, alkalosis. If acidosis, you can say that elimination of bicarbonates through the urine, or you can say that acidosis is due to because of more acid in the blood, whatever you can spell, okay. So, acidosis and alkalosis is due to because of imbalance of the acid base, okay. So, let me see here what is an acid and what is a base, and what is the important role of an things, what is happening here, and how the proton ions has been eliminated from the body, okay. So, if I am talking about an acid, what is an acid? If any compound which forms H plus ion. What is the H plus ion? Proton ion. If any compound, whatever the compound, if it having capacity to form the proton ions in the solution, you can term it as an acid. Clear? So, here if I am talking about an acid, we are having the two types of acid, one is the strong acid and second one is the weak acid. So, what is the difference between the strong acid and the weak acid? So, if any compound completely dissociate into the water, you can term it as a strong acid. If it is not completely dissociate into the water, you can call it as a weak acid. So, what are the examples of the strong acids? The strong acids, there are a lot of strong acids, like the most very important example was, so whenever we are talking about the acid is definitely you can say that yes ma'am, it is a hydrochloric acid, yes ma'am, it is a sulfuric acid, yes exactly. So, these are the strong acids. So, if I am talking about the strong acids, here how you can say the particular compound is a strong acid, because it is completely dissociated into the ions, it is completely dissociated into the protons in the water. So, for example, sulfuric acid, hydrochloric acid, hydrobromic acid, perchloric acid, chloric acid, all these are the strong acids. And what are the weak acids? So, these are not completely dissociate into the ions in the water. So, for example, you can say the formic acid, acetic acid, benzoic acid, phosphoric acid, and sulfuric acid is a strong and sulfurous acid is a weak acid, okay. Do not get confused with the sulfuric and sulfurous. Sulfuric is no doubt it is a strong acid, because it will be dissociated into the ions in the water, and if I am talking about the sulfurous acid, it is a weak. And now we see about the base. So, what is a base? So, if I am talking about a base, if any substances having capability to accept the proton. So, in simply you can call the, what is a base? Proton acceptor. Proton acceptor you can call as a base. So, here we are having the two types of bases, one is the strong base and second one is the weak base. When you can say the particular compound is a strong base, so it having the completely ionized in the water. So, when you can say the particular compound is a strong, and when you can say the particular compound is a weak base. So, if any substances having capability or completely ionized in the water to produce the hydroxide ions, you can call it as a strong base. Okay, and when you can call as any weak base, it is partially ionized into water, resulting the teeny number of hydrogen, very small amount of hydroxide ions will be released. So this is called as any weak base. So what are the examples of any base, strong base? Sodium hydroxide, potassium hydroxide, calcium hydroxide, all these are the strong bases. And what about the weak bases? Yes, exactly, magnesium hydroxide, ammonium hydroxide, because these are the partially ionized in the water to produce the hydroxide ions. Okay, so we will enter into the main important topic and how it is going to maintain the acid base balance. Okay, so if you see here students, this is then a carbonate. So if you see here, bicarbonates forming the carbonic acid, okay, ammonia forming the ammonium ions. So what is going to happen here? The bicarbonates will form the carbonic acid, and this is then a carbonic acid, and which will be split into water plus CO2, and water will be eliminated into the urine, and the carbon dioxide will be get reabsorbed into the body. Okay, and how the proton ions will be passed to the urine, how the proton ions will be get eliminated from the body in the form of ammonium ions. Okay. So here if you are talking about this here, this is then a hydrogen phosphate, and it will be converted into the dihydrogen phosphate, and when the hydrogen phosphate combines with the proton and converted into the dihydrogen phosphate, it can be easily eliminated from the body. Okay. So here what is the normal pH of any urine? It is about approximately 4.5 to 8, and it completely depend upon what the diet you had be taken and what the time of the day it is. Okay. And there are a lot of factors. You can decide the urine pH, okay, and it is also very important where you can see that the pH levels will be changed from person to person. When you had taken a rich protein animal diet, then the pH will be acidic, okay, than vegetarians. So which I had said you in acidosis, alkalosis in my previous slides. Acidosis, which refers excess of acid in the blood, and alkalosis is excess of base in the blood. Okay. And next, this is the common disorders of any imbalance of any acid base balance. So respiratory acidosis, respiratory alkalosis, metabolic acidosis, metabolic alkalosis. So metabolic acidosis is nothing but acidosis, where increasing of acid in the blood. Okay. What is in a respiratory acidosis? Reduced carbon dioxide elimination. If the body is not able to send the carbon dioxide, if the reduced of carbon dioxide elimination, then you can call as respiratory acidosis. If the body has having capacity to send more carbon dioxide, if increased carbon dioxide elimination, which you can call as respiratory alkalosis. These are the few disorders. Thank you, dear students.